So we had the vice presidential debate this week between Tim Walz and JD Vance. Uh, one of the things that one of the stories that came out of this was Tim Walz essentially he's a bit of a Walter Mitty character. I mean, he's told a lot of fibs, but one of them that really came to prominence during the debate was his claim to have been present during the Tiananmen Square uprising. Tom, what did you make of that?
Well, it wouldn't be as damaging if it wasn't for the fact that he's got a very strong track record now of making stuff up, seemingly to insert himself into whatever political debate is of the day.
Yeah.
So as you say, he claimed previously that he was in Hong Kong whilst the Tiananmen Square protests were kicking off in Beijing. And therefore he had, some sort of insider experience, therefore, that could be gleaned. It was later pointed out that he actually showed up, I believe, after the protests were actually crushed and put down. There's been a long line of this now. The IVF was a big talking point in this election campaign because of the fact that a lot of very Catholic Republicans, JD Vance to the fore, were calling for that to be cracked down upon because of the fact that, embryos are discarded as part of that process. So some very religious people are very concerned about that. Tim Walz came out very strongly and said that we had children via IVF. If JD Vance was in power, then we wouldn't have had a family. It turns out they used a different procedure, which doesn't involve casting aside the embryos and therefore wouldn't have been...
The one I was born via.
Oh, indeed, which is the subject of your show, which
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Get into. And there was also a kind of string of things about his service in the National Guard. He heavily implied during the kind of the ongoing debate about kind of school shootings and AR-15s and so on, that these were weapons of war and ones that he had carried in war, even though he never actually saw combat. It's a recurring theme of his, is that he seems desperately to want to kind of center himself in all of these discussions. And I think it's a reminder, I guess, of sort of democratic hubris. As soon as he kind of popped up, there was this sense of, well, what a wonderful pick he was. Isn't he great? He's the school football coach. He's so relatable. And it's turned out to be a lot of, first of all, not just a Walter Mitty character, but a much weirder, to use his favourite phrase, character than they would previously like to suggest, I suppose.
That did seem to be the main thing going for him, as far as like the Team Harris was concerned, was that he used this word weird to describe JD Vance and Trump and other MAGA Republicans. I think my favourite Tim Walz story, which was put about by his campaign team rather than himself, but I think it was when he was running for Congress. He was actually he was arrested for drunk driving, but he tried to blame this on his military career. So he said, no, I wasn't stopped for drunk driving. I was actually the officer didn't hear me because I was deaf, because I'd been hearing all of these
Prince Andrew and
yeah, exactly. This is
I was on my way back from the Pizza Express.
Yeah. So he had hearing trouble because of all the weapons going off that he'd heard. He also gave him balance issues. He made up the story about how the judge even reprimanded the police officer for being so curt with him. It actually turns out, no, he was just over the drink driving limit, and he was driving, over 90 miles per hour in a 50 mile per hour zone. And, how on earth do you think you could get away with pretending that this is actually, something to do with your military record? Simon, what have you made of the...
But that's interesting. I hadn't heard that story. And in a way, I kind of prefer him. I like him slightly more for having done 90 and a 50. Because what he really has, he has this very strong designated driver energy, and like the dad who doesn't lose his temper waiting for his daughter to come out of the disco, and he's just there, and it's a bit dull. It's like these people, they may be the backbone or at least a bone of society, but I find him very unexciting. It's interesting, though, they have to be careful, don't they, not to use all their ammo up, because that weird thing was interesting for a week, maybe 10 days, but it's gone now. That's evaporated. They threw that as hard as they could at Vance. And when a lot of us encountered him for the first time, he has a slightly weird look. I will say that. There is something slightly odd about him. But when you watch him a few times, you forget about that, start to listen to him. He's very articulate. He has a very clear understanding of lots of issues. I suspect he's highly intelligent, easily the most intelligent of the four. Has done quite a lot of reading, I suspect, again, possibly in some books that people would keep the spine towards the wall, possibly. But
don't show that on your Zoom call.
But I think he's a very bright man, and I don't think that Walz is a very bright man. I think he's probably quite a decent man. to be honest, what was it? It's over 35 years ago, Tiananmen Square. I mean, I'm about the same age as Walz. I could imagine misremembering things like that. And I do remember Ronald Reagan claiming to have been on the Normandy beaches, and it turned out it was during a film shoot or something. You know, people do this. It's not a partisan thing. It's a bit embarrassing. I doubt very much. You're right. He did do a similar thing. So maybe it is stolen valor, but I suspect it is actually just a wavering memory. I just don't find his character very convincing or strong, you know. Obviously, the other thing that came out of the debate was him able to say, who won the last election? Do you think Trump is right in claiming that it was stolen? And Vance is he's in a tight corner in terms of that, and he wriggled out of it. But it's undignified to have to watch him, evade that question. In all other regards, I think he's been a very strong pick, a very strong pick. In fact, the one thing they usually say, I mean, there's funny memes going around about you always pick a VP who's like not as bright as you. So Obama picked Biden, Biden picked Harris. Who can hide? Who can Kamala Harris pick from there? There isn't literally stuffed, So. But Trump, to his credit, has picked a man who is, I think, brighter than he was. Certainly is more politically astute. Maybe not as strong in negotiation or whatever. Trump has some hidden strengths and has adopted such an extraordinarily arch persona, throughout his political career that it's almost impossible to know who's underneath or behind it at all. But I find Vance quite plausible. I have to say, quite strong.